Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the 34th Annual Mayor's Environment Expo. My name is Charlene Fritz, and I'm with the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society, along with my colleague, Marina Craner. And we'd like to thank you for participating in the Mayor's Environment Expo. We're very grateful to the City of Calgary for putting on this event for you today. And many thanks to Nalini Mohan, who has been helping us organize for today. We're really excited to have you join us. So today's session is being recorded, and you can access this recording with your link to the Microsoft Teams live event for the next 30 days. And to protect your privacy, you'll not be able to share your audio or your video during this session. So to interact with us, which we'd really love for you to do, and we're inviting you to do that several times throughout the session today, we'd like you to use the question and answer dialogue icon, which looks like this, the two overlapping speech bubbles. And to practice that right now, give it a try. If you could just please enter in your school's name and the grade, and if you know roughly how many students you have with you today. We'd love to know that. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Thank you. And anyone who's just joining us right now, we're just inviting you in the question and answer dialog box to enter in the name of your school and the grades of the students attending today. And roughly, if you know how many are joining us, that would be also great. We're going to start the presentation here shortly. This is the session on West Slope cutthroat trout called Against the Current, hosted by the City of Calgary, of course, the Mayor's Environment Expo. So if you're just joining us now, please enter in your school and grade and the number of students. And Marina, if you start seeing some things come through, you could maybe just read those out, please.
There are 21 students, grade 3 from Auburn Bay.
Great. Welcome, grade 3 class. It's really great to see you. I was at the expo yesterday at the City Hall, and I saw lots of people from grade 3, students from grade 3, and so it's really nice to have you with us today. Any other classes that have joined in the Q&A?
Oh, there is one. St. Damien School in grade 1. We have 43 students.
Wow, welcome grade 1. I hope you're having a good day so far. It's bright and sunny. We'll maybe wait one more minute for some of the other classes who are just joining to enter into the Q&A, please. The name of your school and the grade of the student, and then maybe if you know the numbers as well, that would be really helpful. So if you're just joining, this is the session on West Slope cutthroat trout, hosted by the City of Calgary, the Mayor's Environment Expo. Many thanks to my colleague Marina Craner, who is assisting today, and Nalini Mohan, who has been organizing this session. Final, any other ones coming in, Marina?
Not at this time.
Okay. So we'll just start, and if others join us, maybe we'll just collect them as we go. So the City of Calgary would like to thank all the sponsors and supporters for this event. There's the transportation and workshop sponsors and the venue support partners as well. And now at this time, Mayor Jyoti Gondek has a mayor's welcome, a message for you.
Oki, Ambawastich, Dada Nastara, Tanshe, and hello. Greetings from Mohkinstsis, the place we now call Calgary, at the confluence of the Bow and Elbow Rivers. It is my privilege to welcome you all to the annual Mayor's Environment Expo. As we come together from around the city, I'd like to acknowledge that the Calgary area where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet is a place of confluence, where the sharing of ideas and opportunities naturally come together. Indigenous peoples were the original caretakers of this land, beginning with the Blackfoot Confederacy. They were the first champions of environmental conservation and this land is a home that we now all share. What gives me hope and drives my optimism is seeing the innovation and commitment to climate action from all of you, our students. You all have some incredible ideas to go forward with climate action, and I look forward to hearing them. We all have a part to play. The time for talking has long been over, and the time for action is right now. We at the city know that we are only one piece of this puzzle, and we can't do this alone. Collaboration is critical, and we are committed to working together to build a healthy and green city. Let's show the world that Calgary is a climate leader. I hope these sessions spark conversations and empower all of us to take greater action in protecting our environment. Thank you all for taking part this week and using your voice to amplify this important conversation and make vital change happen.
Thank you to the Mayor for that message, and welcome if anyone has just joined. We're coming from the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society, and so I would like to introduce who we are. We know in the environment there's lots of different things to talk about, and so this session really is all about water. And so in 2002, the Alberta government put in the Water for Life strategy. They realized that water was so important that we all needed to work together to make sure it stayed healthy. And it set out 3 goals, pardon me, safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality water supplies for a sustainable economy. So the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society works together for those 3 goals for our specific watershed, which is the Ghost River watershed. And I'm going to take you there in this presentation. But before we do that, I just wanted to explain how we work towards those goals. We do 4 things: education and outreach, like today, and we also take students out to the river so that they can take a look for themselves. We conduct science and research. We'd use that to provide advice and recommendations. And then we also do ecosystem and habitat repair, so restoring ecological function to damaged areas. So as I mentioned, today's session is called Against the Current, the story of West Slope cutthroat trout in Alberta's headwater ecosystems. So I'd like to introduce you first to this special fish, and then we'll also introduce you maybe to a landscape that you've never visited before. So it's an exciting time to be in this presentation. And I want you to imagine yourself, if you've ever been in a stream or a creek or a river, or even a lake, and you're swimming and you feel yourself going against the current, you know that that's hard work. And this fish has a lot of hard work because it's going against the current, literally against the water, often in its life cycle, but it also faces many challenges. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the biology, the threats, and then go to the Ghost Watershed to show you what's actually being done to help this fish recover. So there's some activities along the way, and those activities you'll know because there's a blue box with a yellow dialogue, and that's the chance for you to enter in some information, your responses, into the question and answer. All right, so how can I make you care about a fish through a computer and my voice? Well, I'm going to need some help. So I've enlisted the help of the fish itself. So throughout the presentation, this fish will talk to you about itself, getting to know it. And so here's our West Slope cutthroat trout. And you can keep your eye on this fish, or you can close your eyes just for a second. I want to get you in this space of trying to think about what it's like to live underwater. So if you can, listen carefully. Can you hear the water? Can you tell when it rolls over a rock or surges and sinks into a pool? Standing along the edge of the river, you notice that the cobbles on the bottom appear wavy and multicolored. A dart of movement catches your eye. It happens so fast you question whether or not it was real. A moment later, a point appears on the surface, sending circular ripples outwards. What's under the surface? You are now convinced that despite the distortion, you have seen a fish. Standing still, with ears and eyes tuned in, you beg the fish to return. But instead of the fish surfacing, you have this strange sensation of falling asleep, waking up under the water. Sounds are muffled, but the underwater world clearly opens up your senses in a new way. and fills you with wonder. I hope you are in this space to hear from this fish, my common name. He's speaking to you now, the West Slope cutthroat trout. I'm called that because of a red-colored mark on my throat. I am a native species of Alberta. I have lived and adapted to conditions along the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains since the glaciers retreated over 10,000 years ago. Excuse me. What is my quest? And so the superhero at work, my quest is to survive. My quest is for survival. So why is it important that I survive? I am important to Indigenous people. I am a symbol of Alberta's biodiversity. I am an indicator species for the health of ecosystems, especially water quality. And I have adapted to exist in extreme habitats, such as colder, less productive ecosystems. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to Charlene Fritz from the Ghost Watershed and present some information to you. We'll return to the voice of the fish in a minute, but I'm going to show you two maps. And on these maps, I want you to notice the green lines. So the map on the left that just came up, those green lines show you where the West Slope cutthroat trout used to live around 1900, just a little bit before the year 1900. So you can see it extends all the way through Calgary. So the West Slope cutthroat trout lived in Calgary. What does that look like now? And when I say now, I'm talking roughly 100 years since that time. April 2013, this map was made, but you can see how those green lines have really shrunk. So the West Slope cutthroat trout don't live in Calgary anymore. They live along the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains in these small, tiny little patches. So what happened? It looks like a sad fish. Why did that happen? Let's talk about the biology of this fish, and that'll give us some clues about what happened. So we're going to first look at the morphology of this fish, which is just a really fancy word for what do I actually look like? Well, we know from its name, of course, this red mark on its throat, it looks like a cut, but it's not cut, it's just the color. So it's called the West Slope cutthroat trout, that red mark on its throat. That's the most distinctive feature, but there's other things you can look at to make sure you know that this is a West Slope cutthroat trout. I have this diagram here that's showing the basic anatomy in black and white. Pardon me. I have this lateral line here, and you can see the lateral line on the fish. This lateral line on the West Slope cutthroat trout, there's darker spots more above that line and towards the back of the fish, as opposed to underneath that lateral line. You also notice this is an adult West Slope cutthroat trout, and if it's spawning, it usually has this sort of reddish type belly. Overall, it's kind of silverish to green in color. Okay, here comes a chance for you to participate. So if you could, in the question and answer box, tell me which one you think is the West Slope cutthroat trout. Is it fish A, fish B, or fish C? And as those responses start to come in, Marina will just let us know what it is you think. Which one, if you were to pick of those three fish, which one do you think is the West Slope cutthroat trout? Is there anything coming in yet? Or should we just reveal the answer, Marina?
Here we go. Fish C.
Oh, well done. Fish C is, in fact, yes, the West Slope cutthroat trout. Rainbow trout and brook trout are the other two, as you can see. Rainbow trout usually has a pinkish line along its lateral line. Brook trout are really distinct. They have a marbled pattern. They have white leading edges on their fins, and often they have halos around the marble pattern. But our West Slope cutthroat trout, that clear mark is the real key. All right, what is my life cycle? How do I reproduce? This is really important to understand for everything else that comes. So these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but let's jump to number 5 first. We're going to talk about the breeding adult. So when the West Slope cutthroat trout is old enough to breed, the female will thrash her tail and make a little nest, a spawning nest called a redd, in clean gravels, and she'll lay her eggs. The male will fertilize those. And this has happened kind of around when the temperature of the water becomes between 6 and 10 degrees Celsius. So here this year, this would have been early May to mid-June. They can do that in various parts of the eastern slopes. Once those eggs have been laid, they take about 6 to 7 weeks to incubate. And the alvin emerge out of those eggs, and that's stage number 2. Now you might notice that really funny bump on the bottom of that fish. That's actually its food source. It's a food sac. It's like you having a little refrigerator strapped to your throat. Essentially, this gives the alvin a couple weeks of food so that they can stay in the nest and not have to travel. When they're strong enough and they're a bit bigger, they're called fry, and then they move to a slow part of the stream. They're not strong enough to handle the strong current yet, and they start eating small things, small bugs. They become juvenile and then overwinter, and breeding adults usually take about 3 to 5 years before they're at that stage to repeat this cycle. So I kind of talked a little bit about what it is that I eat. This fish is talking to us again. And here are 3 special bugs that it loves to eat. The top one is called a caddisfly nymph. This one is a stonefly nymph in the middle, and this one's called a mayfly nymph on the bottom. And these are all something called aquatic invertebrates. They live a large part of their life cycle in the water, and these are really important food sources for our trout species. So if we go to the kids menu, I already talked about the alvin. They use that energy stored in their yolk sac. When they become fry, they eat small little flies that are sometimes called midges. Older juveniles often eat bigger ones like mayflies. And moving to the adult menu, it's a little bit different. They eat the same thing as kids do, but they also can eat bigger things like caddisflies and stoneflies. The stonefly nymph is kind of like the steak dinner for that trout. And it also relies on clean, clear water to complete its life cycle. So where do I live? So if we think about our own house, that's our habitat. So we have places where we can sleep and rest. We have places where we can eat, and we have places where we can be with others. And this is the same for our fish. So we can think about the habitat of a trout, of a fish. They live in a freshwater ecosystem. So these trout don't live in the ocean. They don't live in salt water, but they live in freshwater. And ecosystems have really, you can think about them as having many, many parts. And these parts can be kind of divided into parts that are living. We call those biotic factors or living parts. And so in our freshwater ecosystems where this trout lives, there's bacteria, algae, and I've highlighted 2 things that are really important we'll talk more about, those invertebrates. And I've introduced those aquatic invertebrates to you already, those bugs that live in the water, the aquatic plants, riparian plants, and then of course the fish itself. And there are birds of prey, so things that aren't even in the water but close to the water count as part of this ecosystem because these birds will feed on the trout. There's also lots of non-living things that affect this ecosystem. So there's the elevation, so how high these ecosystems are. There's gravel, there's dirt and rocks in the channel. There's soil along the bank. And there's a water itself. So it's chemical, physical properties like water temperature, dissolved oxygen, and then the climate. So how much sun it gets and the wind. This is called a headwater habitat. And this is the places that I showed you earlier on the map where these trout have found. It's called a refugia, or a place where they take refuge, because they're so well adapted to these higher places. They can live lower down in the river system, but right now they're confined to these headwater, freshwater ecosystems. All right, we could actually just summarize the habitat in 4 words. These West Slope cutthroat trout need habitat that's clean. So in this upper left photo, you can see the gravels are clean. And that's again so that female trout can make her spawning nest, and that the alvin, when they emerge from their egg, they're not suffocated by a lot of sediment or dirty water. We also need over here some cover. So we need that plants along the shore to help cover and protect. So it gives shade and it helps protect against predators like those birds I was talking about. We also need cover inside of the stream. So we need things like boulders and submerged logs. All of those give cover to those fish. Now this photo down on the bottom left, I'm showing you to say that we need connected habitats for this fish. So we need long stretches of streams without interruptions. We need no barriers to movement because in their life cycle, they need slow places. In the winter, they need deep places so that they can survive below the ice. They need all of these different kinds of reaches in the stream to survive. And then this idea of it being cold. So the cold water streams in Alberta along the eastern slopes, those cold water areas have a lot of oxygen and the fish need that oxygen. So to summarize, the habitat for trout is cold, clean, covered, and connected. And that's pretty convenient that they're all starting with the letter C. So let's focus in on a couple of things. I talked about sediment. Sediment is really the fine materials that can get stuck in the gravel. And so we have clean, silt-free gravels on the left in the photo, and we have silt-laden or sediment-laden gravels on the right. This is good. The green check mark, that is not good. Those silt-laden gravels with the red X, that is a foe for this trout on its quest for survival. It also has a friend to help it, and it's these riparian areas. And this is just a fancy word that describes a vegetation that's along the shore. So it could be the shore of a creek, of a lake, of a wetland, anywhere where the water and the land meet or intersect. And it's a zone of lots and lots of life, it's a high biodiversity zone. And that you can see in this photo here, this riparian area is providing cover and shade for those trout. It's a bit deeper as well. And that is a friend to our trout. So here's an example of what that might look like. It's a photo of healthy riparian area up here where the willows are overshadowing. It's going to keep that bank stable. It's going to have lots of bugs falling in the water for the fish to eat. This is unhealthy, and this is as a result of some human activity. So some vehicles have gone through this stream, and we can see it's wider, it's going to be warmer, there's not cover, and it's going to be not a great place for these trout. So that habitat has been changed or damaged. Yes, that's good. We don't want that for our fish. All right, it's your turn now. And so if you're just joining us and you've not had a chance to use the question and answer box, this is your chance. So I'm going to hire you now to work as a fisheries biologist. And that's the lady we see there on the ground. And I'm going to ask you to come through these questions with me about habitat features. And I'd like you to pick the description that best fits the needs of our West Slope cutthroat trout. And as a bonus at the end, if you could remember what the 4 C's are of good habitat for West Slope cutthroat trout. Okay, we'll do a practice one together. So I'm going to give you the feature. So I'm going to say water quality, for example, and what's suitable, what's good, what does our trout need? They need good water quality. So that is the answer to this particular practice question. So are you ready? We're going to do a few together. So here's question A. So I'm going to say, if I'm looking at the amount of my sediment in my gravels, do the trout like low amounts? Do they like moderate? Or do they like lots of sediment in the gravels, in their habitat? I'll just give you a minute to think about that and put that into the question and answer. Are there any answers coming in, Marina?
Not yet, but I think we do have a bit of a delay that we have to give a bit of time for.
Okay.
Okay, so we had one response coming in. It says, hi.
Okay, so someone is suggesting that fish like high sediment in the gravels.
There's another response saying moderate.
Okay. So just so we can get to, what's that? Sorry, go ahead.
We have one more. Grade 1 say high level.
Okay. So the answer for this one, the fish like low amounts of sediment in these gravels. And I'll remind you why, and that's because, and this is a good example here, when the gravel is not a lot of fine material, then these fish can complete their life cycle. They can make the nests in the gravel by swishing their tails and moving the gravel. There's lots of sediment. It's really hard for them to do that. It also will not allow their young to survive because they won't be able to breathe as well. Okay, go through the next few questions. So this is our clean, clear gravels. Our next question is water temperature. So do the trout like low water temperature, so cold, or moderate or high? What do they like the most? What do these trout like the most? Okay, so we'll wait for this to lay a little bit, and then do you remember what one of the C's were? What kind of temperature? What do these fish like?
Okay, we got our first answer, low.
Oh, great. Yes, and they love the low temperature water, the cold water, in other words, because it has more oxygen, and that's where these fish love to be. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to go through the next 3 questions fairly quickly so we can get to some more of the really interesting things about this fish. So the number of barriers to movement, they need to be low. They can't have very many barriers because then they can't have all the different parts of their life cycle. So this is an example of a place that has a barrier. So these are called hanging culverts, and the fish cannot go from one area of the stream to the other. And so that's not good habitat for them. That's not suitable. So if you have too many barriers, then that's not good trout habitat. They need connected habitat. The next question is about the amount of riparian plants. So we have low, moderate, or high. Would you guess that we need lots of those riparian plants? And if you guessed so, then yes, we need high amounts of those plants because they provide cover, for one. So you can see the shade underneath these willows. They also stabilize the channel. They filter out sediment. And it also is that other C word for cover. And the final habitat question is the abundance of aquatic invertebrates. In other words, how many bugs are in the water? Do we need a low amount, a moderate, or a high amount? What would be the best? What would be the best habitat for our trout? Well, if you guessed high, then that's right, because that's our food. That's the food for the trout. So the stonefly nymphs, as I mentioned before, and the mayflies and the caddisflies, all of those, if they're abundant, give really good habitat for our fish. So let's put this all together by fitting the pieces, connecting the dots, and we describe this trout as an indicator species. And all that means is they reveal something about the ecosystem. So if they're present in the water, it tells us that the water is very, very healthy. Threats is our next section, and so we'll talk about the threats to this trout. And the main threats to my survival are, so we're hearing the voice of the fish again, there are natural threats, and that includes flooding, and then the predation, so the birds, of course, that feed on the fish. But humans cause the biggest threat, and these are broadly categorized in 3 ways. So humans can cause habitat loss, hybridization, which is a really big word, and I'll explain it, and harvest, which it means fishing. So for habitat loss, humans can sometimes impact habitat by driving through, for example, the creeks and streams. And so when they do that, they damage places for spawning. The trails can often give sediment into the water, and that we know is not good for our trout. Hybridization is when two different kinds of fish can mate and have young. They have traits from both parents, and those young can reproduce. So over time, the Westlope cutthroat trout and the rainbow trout, they can mate and produce small fish, baby fish, and those baby fish can have traits or features from both of the trout. So over time, if that happens again and again, the Westlope cutthroat trout really kind of loses its identity, its genetic identity. So the rainbow trout, as I mentioned, can hybridize with the Westlope cutthroat trout, and that was an introduced species. Another introduced species is the brook trout. Remember those two from our first identification slide? These two were introduced for the sake of game fishing. So in the early 1900s, the CP Rail wanted to have lots of tourists come, and they knew that they would love to fish, so they thought, oh, we'll just add more fish to the water. Well, what happened was, and they didn't intend this consequence, but these fish outcompeted and hybridized with the Westlope cutthroat trout, and the native trout populations declined. The third thing, the category around harvest, just means when people fish and they take the Westlope cutthroat trout out of the water. They used to do this and keep them because at the time there was a lot. But when too many people were taking too many trout from the water, they became, it's a big word, extirpated, which means locally extinct. Sometimes too, when fishermen now, when they have to catch and release, which means they catch the fish and they release them, but if they have to handle them properly so that they don't die once they've been released into the water. The other thing that can affect these fish, of course, is climate change. So as the water temperature rises potentially, and there are diseases such as whirling disease. Okay, so those are the threats. This is now all bringing us to the place where we understand this fish is a species at risk, and it is decided that this fish is now a threatened fish. So you can see in this picture here all these different types of wildlife, and it's on a spectrum from green to red. So green means a species not at risk at all. They're doing just fine, like this gopher. And I don't know if you've seen any of this spring, but there are lots of them around. And as we go towards the red extinct, that wildlife species no longer exists on the extinct side. We find the Westlope cutthroat trout right here in the middle as threatened. And that means that it's likely to become endangered if nothing is done. So what is being done? This brings us to the next part of a presentation, the recovery in the Ghost watershed. So caring about cutthroat, why would we even care about it? They're a part of our landscape, our watershed. It's an indicator of landscape health. It's the gold seal of water quality, and they provide ecosystem services at these watersheds, these healthy watersheds. Now, that's not me speaking. That's Lauren Fitch. He's a professional biologist. And why I picked this out to share with you today is that he talks about the gold seal. Now, gold seal is the highest standard we can think about. And when our watersheds contain these Westlope cutthroat trout, we know they are the healthiest. And an ecosystem service is simply the things that nature provides for humans that is beneficial to us, that helps us. So when the trout live in our watersheds, we know that humans also benefit. So to quickly talk about what a watershed is, and I'll take you to the Ghost, it is simply where water collects and drains from the land to a common point. And we know water flows from high to low. So when the rain comes, it falls on the land and it will collect and drain from smaller little creeks down into larger rivers. And so when we talk about the Ghost watershed, this fish, this trout is speaking to you again. I live within the freshwater ecosystem of the Ghost River watershed, and this is a photo of it. And when I say the Ghost River watershed, I just want to show you where that is. You're sitting probably in Calgary somewhere in your desks watching this right now, And so here is Calgary, and I've taken you up on a satellite, and we're looking straight down. So Calgary is this big gray footprint. Airdrie is up here, Cochrane over here, and Banff way over here. You probably visited. Some of you might have driven to Banff. They've been to the candy store there, I'm not sure. But Banff, we know, of course, is in the mountains. It's in these long white gray strips are the mountains. And the mountains are high places. So the water drains from high to low from Banff towards Calgary. And you can see all these rivers draining from the mountains through the trees down into the prairie. And the major river that drains and goes through Banff and Calgary is called the Bow River. Now, that Bow River doesn't get all of its water just from this channel. There's tributaries that come in, and the Ghost River is one of those tributaries. The Ghost River watershed is all of the land that collects and drains into the Ghost River. And that eventually goes all the way to Calgary. Past Calgary, it joins the Oldman, and eventually that water makes its way all the way to the Hudson Bay. The city of Calgary recognizes that the watersheds upstream of its treatment plants are so important so that you can have clean drinking water. So the Bow River Source watershed feeds into the Bearspaw Water Treatment Plant, and you can see the Ghost River watershed outlined in red is a small part of that, about 10 to 12% of that area. And it's giving water to the Bow, which then eventually makes its way into Calgary. You can see the other source watershed, and it flows into Calgary as well. This is a really important thing to understand, that what's happening up here in our source watersheds really affects the quality of the water coming in to Calgary. I'm going to take you to a quick place here. We don't have a lot of time. I wish I could actually take you out on a field trip out there, but this red dot is a confluence of two major water bodies in the Ghost watershed. So we have Waypers Creek on the left, and we have Ghost River on the right. You can see there's a really big difference in the color of these two, the river and the creek coming together. And the Waypers Creek on the left has a lot of sediment in it, and typically the Ghost River runs a lot more clear. And so then the question is, why? Why would that be the case? And it really is about the land uses upstream. And I'm going to show a quick video at the end here just to explain that in more detail. But what we do on the land actually really affects the water. So there's these footprints that we can have, a line or a big spatial patch, a big space of area that humans have affected, like a big clear cut, for example. And this idea of shrinking area in the watershed. So we go from a place, lots of places where they could live and did live, and now they live in just a tiny part of our watershed. And the question is, can we reverse that trend? Can we make the space for those fish to live again in those areas? So what are people doing to help us? This is the good news story. There's lots of different plans from the governments of both Canada and Alberta, and they're based on science. So the people here are trying to figure out how many fish are in that stream, and then that helps us decide how much and where we should put our efforts. Our efforts really have to be all together. So the Alberta Native Trout Recovery Program brings together all these different kinds of people, as you can see here. So we need to act, as Mayor Gondek mentioned. We need to find solutions for those problems that we've talked about. And I want to show you some examples so we can use designated trails, for example, if we're doing off-highway vehicles, keeping on the bridge. And the video I'm about to show you will explain that as well. We can actually restore habitat. So we can take an area that's damaged and we can plant willows, for example, and they come back and restore that riparian area. We can also know the rules about harvesting and not take out the trout, the West Slope cutthroat trout from our creeks because we don't know how to identify it, for example. Okay, in the last section of this presentation, I just wanted to show a very beautiful description of why all of this matters. It's kind of a summary of what we've just talked about. And then if there's time, I'll talk about some of the real world solutions that we have in other areas of the province.
Everybody tends to think of streams and rivers as that little blue line that runs through the valley, but really the water is coming from the entire landscape. Water originates on these hillsides, in these valleys, percolates down into the groundwater, and then feeds back into our streams and rivers.
Water is really critical. All of the species, like we all need water, right? Fish, animals, plants, birds, humans. Like we're in the Waiparis and the Ghost watershed here today, doing some habitat restoration to some nearby stream that's been damaged by human development and use. So we're trying to restore these areas for the future.
This is a two-day bioengineering workshop that consists of a classroom session for a full day, as well as a field restoration day out in the Ghost watershed. And the nice thing is that it has really helped us bring together a very diverse group of people. We've had First Nations people here, we've had a lot of environmental consultants, we've had professionals here, as well as recreational users, both motorized and non-motorized recreational users join us for these workshops because they want to learn how they can do their part to keep the source watersheds intact.
Looking at the future that climate change has to bring and recognizing how valuable an area like the Ghost watershed is, we need to start thinking about water management from the whole landscape perspective.
There's all sorts of activities happening on this landscape. So there's cattle grazing out here, there's forestry happening, there's lots of recreational activities happening on the landscape as well. Those activities result in trails and roads, and whenever they cross a stream, that is one more point source for sediment and other contaminants to enter the water. The West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout numbers have declined significantly over the last 100 to 150 years, and their distribution has also contracted. So they're not found in a lot of the streams and rivers where they used to be found. Watersheds that are most intact are going to be the areas where those native trout species have the best chance of persisting. And watersheds that are most intact are also best capable of providing that clean water, which is the source of drinking water for Calgary and all the way across the prairies. So the native trout are an indicator of watershed integrity.
So this is a small tributary to Vipers Creek. It's critical habitat for West Slope cutthroat trout. It's also a designated trail. There was a bridge on the site here before, but it was too narrow for some of the ATVs that are being used nowadays. And so people found a ford upstream of the bridge. And of course, we want to try to keep motorized vehicles out of the creek so that we don't have too much sediment coming down from the sides into the creek and impacting fish habitat by closing up those clean spaces between rocks to spawn, as well as for the invertebrates, their food, to thrive. A couple of years ago, we worked with Trout Unlimited Canada and Alberta Environmental Parks, and they put this new bridge in place that is now wide enough for the side-by-sides and rerouted the trail a little bit away from the creek. So how we use bioengineering in such a site is that where we have eroded stream banks, we stabilize those stream banks by planting willows again. So that way we still have the recreational opportunity and at the same time have improved fish habitat. These are really nice willows. So we should definitely...
So that's going to conclude my presentation today. We've run out of time to do our predictive powers activity, but I'd like to invite you now just to think about saving native trout as a group effort. And that video really showcased it quite well about how we can all work together. And you as students, what is it that you can do? Well, first of all, knowing about this trout is really important. Knowing that we still have these amazing species living in our waters, our headwaters in Alberta. And then if you ever go out fishing and are thinking about how you can protect that fish, or if you're on the landscape camping, there's lots of things you can do so that you leave no trace and that you keep that landscape intact for our native trout. So it is in our hands, and how will the story ultimately end is really up to us. And I wanted to thank you on behalf of this fish as well, and invite you to, if you had any questions, and I think Nalini would have a survey if there's time for you to give some feedback about this presentation and maybe some of your thoughts about how this was helpful for you. Before that survey comes on, thanks to our supporters for making our work in the GOAST possible. We have many supporters, including the City of Calgary and all of these very generous organizations who help for us to do that restoration work and the education work that we're doing today. Thank you.